Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that you'll agree with me that this is one of the more fertile odd couples that we have had the pleasure of having amongst us. Thank you very much for those remarks, Manny. I think it really helps to put the book in a context that every one of us who watched the Olympics and who has strong feelings about the future of this country puts this book in a very, very exciting light. I'd like now to ask Tom Flanagan to come forward on behalf of himself and his two co-authors, Andre Ledresse and Christopher Alcantara, to tell you a bit about the new policy approach that their book portends. Now, Tom hardly needs any introduction to an Ottawa crowd. I'm giving Tom, of course, a bit of a free ride on the extensive reputation of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and inviting him here tonight. He's, of course, best known as one of the founders of the Calgary School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary, as well as a longtime advisor to and observer of the leaders of the Reform part of the Alliance and now the Conservative Party. Tom is one of Canada's most prominent commentators on public policy in general and Aboriginal policy in particular, and his earlier book, First Nations Second Thoughts, was a winner, I believe I'm right in saying, Tom, of the Donner Canadian Foundation Prize for the best book on public policy in Canada in that year. Tom, will you come up and tell us about the book and about your co-authors?
Well, let me thank all the old friends who've made this evening possible. Brian Lee Crowley and Mike Coates, the president of, as I like to call it, Canada's Invisible Government, Helen Nolta. And Mike says it's okay to say that, it makes us look powerful. And Rick Anderson from the Walton Group of Companies, who's subsidized the truly impressive bargain price you're getting of $17.50 a copy, and I hope to buy lots more and take advantage of the bargain. So thanks, guys, for helping out with the launch. About the book, really, from my side, it begins with recruiting Chris Alcantara as a graduate student in 2001. Chris, you're here somewhere. Do you want to raise your hand? And Chris is perhaps the only graduate student at the University of Calgary who actually finished his MA in the promised 1 year. Filipino work ethic, he says. But anyway, Chris did some remarkably good research on existing property rights on Indian reserves, customary rights, certificates of possession, and leases. And we went on to co-publish some of that work in article form, but Chris said, we really should turn this into a book. And so I put my attention to that, and about that time, I became aware of the work that Andre Ledresse was doing. It was being published on the website of the First Nations Tax Commission. And where's Andre? Andre is standing also at the back. Andre is a PhD in economics from Simon Fraser and president of Fiscal Realities Consulting. Has done many studies for Manny Tools on the practical problems that are faced in doing economic development on reserves, and he built up really quite an impressive body of work, pointing out what was wrong with the current situation and also suggesting how that could be changed. So I'm at an age where I'm getting too old to do any original work myself, so I specialize in bringing together the work of energetic young guys. So I said to myself, wouldn't it be great if I could get Chris and Andre together and get them to do all the work, and then I'll take the credit for it. So that's essentially what has happened. And Manny came in as a bonus. However, actually, I thought we had a cover design, and Manny looked at it and he said, no, that's Coast Salish. We can't have Coast Salish art. We have to have Shuswap interior PC. So anyway, we had these contributions from various places. So anyway, the way it's worked out is that we divided the book into 3 parts. And I wrote the first part, some general comments about the importance of property, and then a historical chapter, and this is actually quite important, on the property rights of Indigenous people before European contact. It's really quite a myth that the inhabitants of the Americas were people without property. They had extensive systems of both collective and private property, which have largely been what's tragic, not only the systems were destroyed, but the memory of those systems has largely been erased, so that many indigenous people today have borrowed the white man's interpretation of it as people without property. So we had to address that. And then a chapter on the Dawes Act, which was an American 19th century attempt to privatize Indian reservations in that country. But it was done under the premise that the Indians had a lot of surplus land, that we would break up the reserves, give each Indian a quarter section, there'd be no more tribal governments, the surplus land would be sold off, and Indians would just become Americans. Well, it was largely considered to be a failure, and there are many lessons there as to how not to go about this, and so we have a chapter on the Dawes Act. So that's what I contributed, and then Chris reprised his work on existing property rights, customary rights, which are very widespread actually, but the problem is they can't be enforced in court, so there's no security. Certificates of possession, which are also widespread, but they can only be sold to other members of the same band. So effectively, there's no market for them. The potential number of buyers is too small. And leases, which again are widely used today for business development or residential development on reserves, but they are by nature temporary, and that creates all kinds of problems as they come to their deadline. So Chris did very careful study of these existing forms of property rights and showed how each one is useful, but each one also has some important limitations. And then Andre took responsibility for part 3, and he reprised some of his case studies of economic development on Indian reserves, successful in fact. I mean, there is a lot of successful projects now, but even the successful ones tend to take much longer than they should, and that means more expense, opportunity cost for the capital, lawyers' fees. I say with apologies to recognized law students in here, but it does run up the bill. And so Andre shows in great detail just what the difficulties are, and then in the last chapter he sketches out for the future the notion of a First Nations Property Ownership Act, which he and Manny have been working on. So I think it's fitting that we close with ideas which really are not mine at all, but come from Manny Jules and Andre. They're the ones who've really done the heavy lifting on. Chris and I had been working for years on pointing out the difficulties of the present system, but to be honest, I didn't have any good ideas on how you might improve it. Maybe that's especially of academics pointing out what's wrong. But Manny and Andre had really come up with what I think is a viable, practical approach for new legislation, which will, as we say, go beyond the Indian Act and make it possible for First Nations to own their land collectively, and also to create individual property rights. So this is not just a book. It is a book, and I urge you to buy it, but it is not just a book. It is also one phase of a larger campaign to get this legislation developed. And Manny is going to spend a year consulting with Native people and try and demonstrate that there is some support for this, and that'll culminate, we hope, in the drafting of legislation. And at some point, obviously, the government will have to take over carriage of it, but this has to be a First Nations-led initiative. You know, it won't work if it's imposed from the outside. If it's just Flanagan telling Indians what to do, it won't go anywhere. It's basically their idea, and it really is, in fact, coming from Manny, and it has to be presented that way. And so I think we're well launched. I thank all of you for coming. I think this is a wonderful start, and there's some very influential people here. I just saw at the back, Senator St. Germain just came in. Jerry, I know this is a topic that has been of great interest to you for many years, and we've had a number of other senators. We have other senators here, and MPs have been coming and going all evening. So I can't identify everybody by name, but I think this is a wonderful crowd to launch this with. So anyway, I hope you'll buy the book at half price, take advantage of the deep discount, and thanks again to all the people who've cooperated with me to make this possible. And thanks to my younger, as I said, my younger co-authors. It's been really a privilege to work with energetic young guys and be able to take part of the credit for it. So enjoy the book.